Denver's dawn drifted in under a veil of pale mist, the airport's glass walls catching the first light like shattered mirrors. Beneath the steel arches of the terminal, two German shepherds, Max and Shadow, strode beside Officer Grace Miller, their footsteps echoing with quiet warning. Across the bustling crowd, a beautiful woman in a bright red coat appeared like a streak of fire against the cold morning air. One hand clutched her swollen belly, the other dragged a trembling suitcase, her smile fragile, her steps too careful, too rehearsed. Then Max froze. Shadow's ears shot up. Both dogs turned toward the woman in red, as if hearing something no human could ever detect. A low, strange sound pulsed from her belly, almost a moan. Max growled softly. Shadow backed up, fur rising along his spine. Grace tightened her grip on the leashes, a chill sliding down her back. "What is it, boys?" But when the woman's eyes met theirs, her expression flickered. Fear, guilt, something breaking beneath the surface. And what they were about to uncover inside Denver International Airport would change everything. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. Denver's winter morning came down like a sheet of pale steel over the sprawling airport, the runways shimmering with thin frost, the glass terminals catching the early light in cold, fractured reflections. Inside the main concourse, the air carried the sterile scent of polished floors and recycled heat, blending with the low hum of heel clicks, rolling luggage, and the occasional muffled boarding announcement. Officer Grace Miller moved through that current of travelers with the steady posture of someone who had learned to read danger in silence. She was 29, tall and athletic, her frame shaped by years of K9 work. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a tight ponytail that kept her sharp-angled face visible, revealing eyes that mixed discipline with a warmth she tried to hide. Grace had grown up the daughter of a firefighter, and the memory of her father running into a burning warehouse when she was 11, never to return, had shaped her entire philosophy. Protect first, fear later. On each side of her, two German shepherds kept pace with synchronized strides, contrasting personalities bound by loyalty. Max, the older of the pair, almost 7 years old, had a broad chest, dense black and tan coat, and a stern, commanding gaze that made strangers instinctively step aside. He carried himself like a veteran soldier, shaped by countless drills and missions. Shadow, younger at 4 years old, was leaner, more spirited, with bright amber eyes and a habit of flicking his ears whenever something amused or intrigued him. He often glanced up at Grace as if waiting for praise or a treat, injecting a touch of humor into her otherwise rigid workday. Together, the trio had become a familiar sight in Denver International Airport, a quiet but powerful presence meant to detect what humans could not. The morning seemed ordinary enough. Families juggling children and coffee cups, business travelers pacing with phone calls, tourists pointing cameras toward the huge glass atrium. But the illusion of normalcy began to ripple the moment a single figure appeared through the sliding doors at the far end of the terminal. Rachel Hayes stepped inside like a splash of vibrant color against the gray palette of winter travel. She was 27, with soft blonde hair that fell in loose waves around her shoulders and skin that carried the faint flush of the cold outside. Her beauty was gentle, understated, the kind that made strangers smile at her without knowing why. She wore a bright red coat, thick, warm, and cinched above her large pregnant belly, giving her the look of someone both fragile and determined. In her right hand she dragged a brown suitcase with a slightly crooked wheel, and her left hand rested protectively on the curve of her stomach, fingers moving in absent-minded circles as though soothing the little life inside. Yet there was something uneasy in her steps, too slow, too cautious, too aware of every person around her. Her eyes darted between signs, crowds, and shadows, not in panic, but like someone holding a secret under their breath. Grace noticed her only because Max slowed down first. The older dog's ears pricked, his nostrils expanding as if he had stepped into a new, invisible gust of scent. Shadow, sensing Max's shift, mirrored him almost instantly, his playful energy vanishing into rigid focus. Grace frowned lightly, following their line of sight toward the woman in red. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. A pregnant mother traveling alone, perhaps stressed, perhaps late for a flight. But Max's posture hardened. His muscles tightened along his shoulders. Shadow's fur lifted slightly along his spine. Grace felt a small, familiar knot form in her chest, the instinctive signal that her dogs were detecting something she couldn't see. Rachel had moved only a few steps into the concourse when Max suddenly emitted a deep, resonant bark that cut sharply through the ambient noise. Heads turned immediately. Shadow joined in a heartbeat later, his bark higher, more urgent, and both dogs surged forward in unison, the leashes snapping tight in Grace's grip. Her boots skidded half an inch on the polished floor as she leaned back with all her strength. "Max! Shadow! Heel!" she barked. But the dogs were no longer in standard alert mode. There was desperation in their voices, an almost protective alarm rather than aggression. Rachel froze. Her blue eyes widened in terror, her hand clamping over her belly. "Please, please stop them!" she cried out, voice cracking as her suitcase tipped to its side and tumbled across the floor. Passengers gasped and backed away, some shielding their children, others pulling out their phones. Grace wrestled the leashes, her pulse hammering, not understanding what her dogs had sensed, but trusting that it was real. Max pulled with the force of an animal who believed something was about to go horribly wrong. Shadow barked in escalating bursts, eyes locked on the woman in red, as though trying to warn her of something she herself did not yet understand. The entire terminal seemed to hold its breath in those few seconds. Rachel stumbled backward, both hands now gripping her stomach, her voice trembling. "Help me! Keep them away!" And Grace, fighting to keep control, felt the leather straps burn against her palms as one of the leashes slipped dangerously loose. "Max! Shadow! Stop!" she shouted. But the dogs lunged again, and this time, Grace barely kept her grasp as both leashes tore forward, stretched to their limit, ready to break free. Chaos swept through the Denver terminal like a sudden winter gust, scattering the calm that had existed moments earlier. Travelers gasped, some stumbling over luggage, others shielding their children as Max and Shadow lunged forward with explosive urgency. Grace Miller barely managed to tighten her grip on the leashes before they slipped entirely. In the commotion, Rachel Hayes, her bright red coat now clinging awkwardly to her trembling frame, stumbled backward, one hand clutching her swollen stomach while the other reached out for balance. Tears streaked her pale cheeks as she cried, "I didn't do anything. I just want to catch my flight." Her voice trembled, soft and melodic even through fear, the kind that made strangers instinctively want to help her. Grace immediately straightened, letting her training override the rising panic around her. "Security teams, clear a path," she commanded, her tone sharp enough to cut through the noise. The closest officer to respond was a tall, broad-shouldered man named Officer Kevin Marsh. Kevin was in his early 40s, with a square jaw covered in dark, uneven stubble he often forgot to shave during long overnight shifts. He had deep-set brown eyes that always held a shadow of fatigue, a result of years spent juggling split custody of his two kids and the emotional burnout of airport policing. Still, he was reliable, firm, and compassionate in a gruff way. Kevin quickly moved forward, helping push back the forming crowd. Several civilian employees, like Dana, a petite red-headed gate agent known for her nervous energy, also assisted in widening the path, guiding frightened passengers away. "Ma'am, we're taking you for a quick check," Grace said, lowering her voice but keeping authority in it. Rachel shook with fear, her blonde curls falling chaotically around her face as she whispered, "Why are your dogs acting like this? What did I do?" But Grace had no answer. Even she didn't understand the depth of Max and Shadow's panic. The dogs weren't aggressive. They were desperate, anxious, their instincts screaming louder than their barks. Max's tail was stiff, his amber eyes locked on Rachel's belly with unwavering intensity. Shadow kept letting out small whines between each bark, pawing at the floor as if urging them to hurry. Inside the private screening room, small, sterile, with off-white walls and a faint buzz from the old LED light overhead, Rachel was guided to a metal chair. She collapsed into it, breathing shallowly, her red coat wrinkled from fear and clutching. A new security staffer entered, Nurse Linda Harper, a middle-aged woman with gentle hazel eyes and silver-streaked hair tied neatly in a bun. Linda had been a nurse for over 20 years. She carried a motherly aura, the kind that comforted even hardened officers. "Just breathe, sweetheart," Linda said softly. "We're only making sure you're safe." 2 additional screeners entered to assist. Martin Ortiz, a slim Hispanic technician with short black hair and a calm, almost distant demeanor, and Julia Brennan, a young trainee with freckles scattered across her nose, whose tendency to panic was barely hidden behind forced professionalism. They began scanning Rachel's luggage. One by one, they removed items that any expectant mother might carry. Folded baby clothes in pastel blue, a small blanket decorated with cartoon elephants, a plastic bottle still sealed in packaging. Everything appeared innocent, but Max and Shadow still refused to calm. Their bodies trembled. Their ears remained forward. They didn't bark now. Instead, they emitted tense, continuous growls, low enough to vibrate through the air like a warning. Outside the room, Grace paced, torn between instinct and uncertainty. Her father once taught her that dogs, especially trained shepherds, knew truths humans often overlooked. She had learned never to ignore their intuition. Shadow suddenly scraped at the bottom edge of the door, his claws clicking frantically against metal, while Max's growl rolled deeper, more forceful. Rachel watched the dogs and felt her breath quicken. "Please, it's just the baby moving," she said weakly, though even she sounded unconvinced. Her face had turned a shade paler, sweat beading at her temples. Linda leaned forward. "Are you in pain?" Rachel tried to shake her head, but then her body folded forward abruptly. A strangled cry escaped her throat as she clutched her belly with both hands. "No, no, this isn't right. It's not supposed to hurt like this." Her back arched. Her breaths came in short, choking gasps, and she nearly toppled from the chair. Linda sprang toward her, shouting, "Call medical, now!" Julia fumbled for the intercom, her hands shaking as she tried to press the emergency button. Martin instinctively reached to steady Rachel, but jerked his hand away when she screamed at the slightest touch. The room filled with tension thick enough to choke on. Outside the door, Max let out a long, haunting howl, one he only used during bomb alerts or life-threatening emergencies. Shadow barked, high-pitched and frantic, aimed directly toward Rachel's womb. Grace's heart hammered so hard she felt it in her throat. She threw the door open, stepping into the room as if driven by an invisible force. Rachel was doubled over, tears falling freely, sweat soaking the collar of her red coat. "Something's wrong, oh God! Please help me," she sobbed. Grace froze, staring at Rachel's contorted expression, at Max and Shadow pressing closer, at the terror rising in everyone's eyes. And in that single second, she felt her stomach drop with dread as a cold realization hit her. None of this resembled normal labor. The chapter ends as the alarm blares, Linda calling for emergency responders, while Grace stands stunned in the doorway, her pulse pounding as she thinks, "This isn't childbirth. So what exactly did my dog smell inside her?" The emergency doors of Denver General swung open with a metallic groan as paramedics rushed Rachel Hayes inside, her red coat half hidden beneath the pale green hospital gown hastily thrown over her. Fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead, casting sharp shadows on her pale face and sweat-soaked hair. She lay trembling on the stretcher, clutching the sides with white knuckles, her breaths short and ragged. Grace Miller followed closely, her boots echoing across the sterile tiles, while Max and Shadow padded beside her with tense, purposeful strides. The dogs refused to lag behind, their bodies rigid, ears pinned forward, moving like two sentinels racing against time. They were met by Dr. Elias Rowan, a man in his early 50s with storm-gray hair swept back in neat waves. His square jaw was clean-shaven, but deep stress lines carved across his forehead showed a lifetime of battles in operating rooms. His eyes, sharp, steel blue, held an intensity that made patients trust him and colleagues depend on him. Elias had gained a reputation for calm precision after losing his younger sister to a preventable surgical error decades ago. Ever since, he treated every stranger as someone whose life could not be taken lightly. "Bring her here," he ordered, his voice deep and steady. Nurse Talia Brooks moved alongside him, a tall, willowy woman with dark skin, braided black hair, and a calm efficiency that soothed even the most frightened patients. She had only worked at Denver General for 3 years, yet her warm presence made her one of the most requested nurses in the ward. "Ma'am, stay with us," she whispered to Rachel, gently brushing damp strands from the woman's forehead. The stretcher stopped in an ultrasound room. The equipment inside was spotless, cold, and humming quietly. Rachel lay back, eyes fluttering, her breath hitching every few seconds. Her red coat was still visible beneath the gown, its bright fabric a reminder of the chaos at the airport. Grace hovered near the doorway, Max sitting tightly against her left side, Shadow against her right, both dogs staring at Rachel's belly with that same intense, haunted focus. Dr. Rowan applied the gel to the ultrasound probe, his movements practiced and efficient. He pressed it gently to Rachel's abdomen. The screen flickered once and then stabilized. His brow furrowed instantly. He angled the probe again, then again, pressing harder. What should have been the soft curvature of a fetus appeared instead as jagged metallic patches that disrupted the entire image. Bright reflections sparked oddly across the screen, too sharp, too mechanical. "That's wrong," he murmured. Grace stepped closer. "What do you see?" Rowan exhaled, long and slow. "Not a fetus, not anything biological." Talia leaned closer to the screen, her eyes widening. "Is that metal?" "Yes," Rowan said, adjusting the imaging depth. "Metal, silicone, synthetic fibers. This is no pregnancy." Rachel whimpered softly, shaking. I didn't want... This isn't..." Please. Her voice cracked, the pain slicing through every word. Rowan cleared his throat, addressing Grace directly. There is a foreign structure inside her abdomen, shaped like a womb, but artificial. It has multiple sealed compartments. A fake uterus, Talia whispered, horrified. Grace felt her stomach drop, her mind spiraling through implications. Smuggling, coercion, organized crime. Max and Shadow suddenly barked in perfect unison, the sound booming off the sterile walls like an alarm of their own. Rowan looked at the ultrasound again, his face drained of color. One compartment has ruptured. The substance inside, it's spreading. Talia covered her mouth. Is it toxic? Rowan nodded grimly. Highly. If the leak continues, she won't survive. And if she had boarded that flight... He didn't finish the sentence. The image was too horrifying to speak aloud. Rachel's body jerked, her breathing becoming uneven, her nails digging into the sides of the hospital bed. It hurts. Oh God. It burns. Something inside. Please. Save me. Grace took a step toward her, torn between duty and empathy. She recognized now that Rachel wasn't just suspicious. She was terrified, trapped inside something bigger than any individual crime. Max whined, pressing his head against Grace's thigh, while Shadow inched forward, nose pointed directly at Rachel's stomach, growling softly, not in anger, but in warning. Rowan stood up sharply. Prep an operating room now. We need to remove that device before the chemical spreads any further. Talia sprinted toward the intercom, calling for a surgical team. Down the hallway, the red "surgery in progress" light flickered to life. Alarms beeped. Nurses rushed past. A gurney rolled into view. Grace, Max, and Shadow followed as far as they were allowed. At the door to the operating theater, Rowan paused long enough to face Grace. If those dogs weren't trained the way they are, she would have been dead before anyone realized what she was carrying. Then the doors swung open. Bright white light flooded the corridor. The surgical team moved in like a storm. The last thing Grace saw before the room closed was Rachel's terrified eyes staring back at her. Pleading, fading, desperate. The door sealed shut with a hiss, the red warning light glowing ominously overhead. And in the hallway, Grace's heart pounded as one chilling question echoed through her mind. Had Max and Shadow alerted soon enough to save not only Rachel, but everyone on that plane she almost boarded? The surgical wing of Denver General felt strangely quiet after the storm of alarms and rushing footsteps. A soft winter haze curled against the tall windows, blurring the city lights outside as if the world itself held its breath. Inside Recovery Room 2, Rachel Hayes lay pale and fragile beneath a thin white blanket. Her face, still beautiful despite exhaustion, seemed carved from porcelain, lips colorless, eyelids heavy. Her bright red coat had been folded neatly on a nearby chair by one of the nurses, the seams slightly frayed, now stained faintly by the chaotic mourning that had nearly cost her life. The artificial womb had been removed, an intricate silicone structure with metal compartments, and now lay sealed inside an evidence locker awaiting federal examination. Grace Miller stood beside the bed. Max and Shadow settled on the floor like living statues. Even lying down, they radiated alertness. Max watched Rachel with steady, knowing eyes, while Shadow occasionally sniffed the air as if ensuring the danger was truly gone. Rachel stirred. Her lashes trembled before her eyes opened, soft blue irises clouded with fear and confusion. When she saw Grace, she let out a tiny sob. You stayed," she whispered. Her voice was weak, but its sincerity washed through the room like a collapsing dam. Grace nodded. "You're safe now," Rachel swallowed, her throat tight. Safe, she echoed, the word sounding more like a question than belief. A moment later, tears broke free, quiet, trembling tears, and she pressed a hand to her now flat abdomen wrapped in gauze. I never meant for this to happen. Grace pulled a chair closer, her expression gentler than the persona she carried on duty. Tell me everything. From the start. Rachel's fingers curled into the blanket. I'm a single mom, she began, voice shaking. My son, Lucas, he's 6, sweet, quiet, scared of loud noises. Her breath hitched. His father left years ago. Money was always tight. Rent, school clothes, medical bills, everything. She swallowed hard. Then I met Victor. The name hung in the air like smoke. Victor Hayes? Grace asked. Rachel nodded. He said he ran a small medical courier company. He looked so trustworthy then. Well-groomed, polite, always in a suit. Tall, dark hair, olive skin, a face that could look charming or terrifying depending on what he wanted. She shivered. He offered me money, a lot of it. Said I only had to carry something delicate past airport security. I thought it was medicine, something harmless. Max shifted slightly, ears twitching. Shadow gave a soft, sympathetic whine. Rachel's gaze went distant. But a week ago, I overheard him on the phone, talking about red coats and fake bellies and how no one ever suspects a pregnant woman. That's when I realized I was being used. And when I tried to walk away, she choked back a sob. He showed me a photo of Lucas walking home from school. He said if I didn't finish the job, he'd make sure my son never came home again. Grace's jaw tightened, anger simmering under her ribs. Rachel breathed shakily. Today, there are 2 more, just like me, dressed in red, carrying fake pregnancies. One landing soon, one later tonight. She looked into Grace's eyes, pleading. You have to stop them, please, before they end up like me, or worse. Grace stood immediately. I will. Minutes later, she was outside, radio pressed to her shoulder as she contacted airport command. Her voice was sharp, fast, precise, like a blade cutting through fog. A red alert sweep was ordered across Denver International Airport. Additional K-9 units were dispatched. Officers were instructed to discreetly observe all women in red coats near the arrival gates. Back at the terminal, the air vibrated with tension. Travelers milled unaware, oblivious to the silent manhunt threading through their midst. Grace arrived with Max and Shadow at the front of the security line just as passengers from an inbound flight began to spill out. Max stiffened first. Shadow followed. Their bodies aligned like magnets drawn to the same target. A woman in a scarlet dress stepped through the crowd, a heavy artificial curve under her coat. Her face was thin, sharp-featured, with dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked exhausted, eyes darting in quick, nervous flickers. Max barked once, deep and decisive. Shadow answered with rapid, sharp bursts. Ma'am, Grace called, advancing with 2 officers. Airport security, please step aside. The woman panicked immediately, stumbling backward and clutching her fake belly. But there was no escape. Officers surrounded her, and within seconds the truth was exposed. A second silicone womb packed with narcotics. Before Grace could catch her breath, Shadow jerked violently sideways, letting out an almost feral growl. Max followed, his hackles rising. They weren't looking at the arrested woman. They were staring at a shadowed corner near an empty vending machine. A man in a dark charcoal suit stood there, tall, lean, with sharp cheekbones and slicked back black hair. His tie was a deep crimson, matching the coats used in the smuggling scheme. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were cold and calculating. He held a phone loosely to his ear, but his gaze was fixed directly on Grace. When their eyes met, he smiled, a thin, knowing smile, a deliberate challenge. In Grace's ear, Rachel's trembling voice echoed, "His name is Victor." The chapter ends as Max and Shadow growl louder, and Victor's smile widens, just as he turns away into the crowd. The chase inside Denver International Airport unfolded like a controlled storm, quiet on the outside, thunderous beneath the surface. Victor's thin smile had barely faded when Grace Miller signaled with two sharp hand gestures. Officers moved like shadows, splitting into two groups, one circling behind him while the other kept a careful distance from his front. Max and Shadow advanced first, their paws landing in perfect rhythm, each step deliberate like trained warriors who understood that a single misstep could cost a life. Max's ears were locked forward, his thick coat bristling along his spine, his eyes hard with the certainty of a dog that had found his target. Beside him, Shadow's lean frame moved low and agile, blocking Victor's potential escape route even before the man seemed aware of it. Victor Hayes, finally confronted, was a tall figure with sculpted cheekbones, olive-toned skin, and hair slicked back so carefully it gleamed under the terminal lights. Up close, Grace could see the faint stubble on his chin, the product of a rushed morning, and his sharp, calculating eyes that flickered with a mixture of condescension and surprise. He carried himself like a man accustomed to control, the kind who built his empire by manipulating the weak and rewarding the cruel. That confidence had cracks now. The dogs saw them first. Max let out a single bark, deep, authoritative, final. Shadow blocked Victor's step to the left, snapping the air with a warning growl. Victor attempted a pivot, subtle and practiced, but Grace was faster. "Victor Hayes!" she shouted, her voice slicing through the noise. "Hands where I can see them." For a heartbeat, time held still. Then Victor raised his hands slowly, palms outward, expression slipping from confidence into a sly, weary resignation. "You've made a mistake," he said, in a polished, steady tone, the voice of a man used to charming his way through locked doors. But the illusion shattered the moment Officer Kevin Marsh appeared from behind, cuffs ready, face stern. Victor tensed as the cold metal clicked around his wrists. His suitcase, an expensive dark leather piece, was opened on the spot. Inside were forged identification cards for women across different states, a sleek satellite phone with encrypted software, and a printed list detailing upcoming flights, names of carriers, and coded notes next to each one. Grace felt a chill crawl along her spine. The scale of the operation was bigger, colder, and more systematic than she had imagined. And Max and Shadow had sniffed out the truth before any machine ever could. With Victor in custody, the long day evolved into days of unraveling threads. Homeland Security arrived with agents in Navy jackets, their demeanor crisp and methodical. One of them, Agent Samuel Trent, a rugged man in his 40s with close-cropped black hair, introduced himself with a firm handshake. He had a broad frame, a perpetual frown line between his brows, and scars along his knuckles that hinted at a past full of conflict. "Good dogs," he murmured, glancing down at Max and Shadow with rare warmth. "They just saved us 6 months of investigative work." As the operation expanded, more women were found, some already wearing red coats, some waiting for instructions in cheap motels, all trembling with relief as the authorities freed them from the cruel system that held them hostage. No one fought back. No one denied what they had been forced to do. Many had children waiting at home. All of them carried wounds that were deeper than any fake pregnancy could hide. Meanwhile, Rachel, frail but recovering, received the news that Victor had been captured. She cried openly in her hospital room, her voice cracking as she embraced her little boy, Lucas. Lucas was small for his age, with sandy brown hair and timid gray eyes that seemed to widen at every unfamiliar sound. He clung to his mother with childlike fierceness, burying his face in her red sweater. This time the color symbolized survival, not shame. Grace visited them briefly. Rachel whispered, "I'll testify. I'll do everything I can." She wasn't the broken woman from before. The fear still lingered, but hope sat beside it now, and that hope had been earned. The media storm that followed was overwhelming. News anchors spoke with trembling admiration about the young K-9 officer whose dogs detected what scanners missed. Social platforms flooded with messages of gratitude. Elderly viewers praising Grace's courage. Mothers thanking Max and Shadow for saving innocent women. Retired officers writing long paragraphs about loyalty and instinct. Grace skimmed them between shifts, usually shaking her head at the attention. But Max and Shadow basked in it. Ears perked, tails high each time someone asked for a picture. By late afternoon, Denver was washed in golden light as the sun slipped behind glass towers. The police precinct quieted, the earlier chaos replaced by the soft hum of evening traffic. Grace sat on the concrete steps outside, Max's broad head resting on her lap, while Shadow curled tightly beside her, pressing close for warmth. She scratched their ears softly. "You two heroes," she whispered fondly. "You'll be on TV again tomorrow, won't you?" Max's tail thumped lazily once. Shadow's nose nudged her elbow. The phone in her pocket buzzed. A call from the district coordinator. "Officer Miller," the voice said. "Rachel and her son have been safely placed into the witness protection program." Grace exhaled deeply, the breath carrying tension she hadn't noticed she'd been holding. She stood, tightening her grip on both leashes. "Come on, boys," she said gently, as Max and Shadow rose beside her. "This case is done. Let's go home." Under the fading Denver sky, the three walked side by side, silent, steady, and warm in the glow of a victory won, not with weapons, but with instinct, compassion, and unwavering loyalty. Sometimes the world feels cold, uncertain, and crowded with dangers we cannot see. But every so often, God sends us a reminder, through a moment, a stranger, or even a loyal dog, that His miracles still walk quietly beside us. What happened in Denver was not just the work of training or instinct. It was grace, a whisper from above. Two German shepherds who sensed what no machine could detect. A young officer who chose courage over fear, and a mother who found redemption at the very edge of darkness. In our everyday lives, we forget how many unseen battles God protects us from, how many quiet blessings surround us. But miracles, big or small, are always there. Sometimes they bark, sometimes they warn us, sometimes they show up right when we think hope is gone. So tonight, may this story remind you that God's hand is never far. May He watch over your family, keep your children safe, and bring peace to every corner of your home. And if you feel alone or overwhelmed, remember, He still works through the faithful, the innocent, and the loyal souls who walk beside us, on 2 legs or 4. Before you go, if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and leave a comment about where you're watching from. And if you want more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God places in our path, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, protect you, and keep His light upon you, today and always. Amen.